Welcome to this brief overview of the GCPS ESOL Instructional Framework. My name is Tricia Jeremiah, and with me today is my colleague Anna Yang. We are both instructional coaches in the EL Programs Office and are pleased to share this framework as a tool to support all teachers of English learners. By the end of this short video, you will have a general understanding of the GCPS ESOL Instructional Framework and the research upon which it is based. Also, it is our intention that teachers will understand the connections between the framework and best practices for planning lessons. As we begin, we'd like to ground our work in the C&I Actions for Improved Student Engagement and Achievement framework that outlines the stakeholders who play a critical role in the success of all students. For the purposes of this overview, we will mostly be focusing on specific CLT and teacher actions that are necessary to improve the achievement of our English learners, which in turn will impact the achievement of all students. So here's my question. Have you seen the GCPS ESOL Instructional Framework? Take a minute to think about what you notice here. Did you notice that the foundation of the structure is centered around knowing the students? That's because before we can dive into best instructional practices for teaching ELs, we must be aware of their educational backgrounds as well as the linguistic and cultural assets they bring into our classrooms. Once you have this information about the students, then you will be prepared to provide them with the most effective instruction. I'm sure you also noticed the AKS together with the curriculum, assessment, and instruction make up the roof of the structure. The 5 pillars in the center are the components that research shows are necessary during instruction to help English learners gain access to the language of the content that will ultimately lead them to acquire both academic and social language. How about the center pillars? Did you notice that the pillar has a bold outline? Language and literacy development is central in every content area. We will further define this pillar along with the remaining pillars later in the video. The pillars are in no particular order, nor are they all meant to be included in every lesson. So let's go ahead and notice the title of each pillar. Starting from left, we have in red, Teacher and Student Collaboration, followed by Instructional Conversation, then Language and Literacy Development, Connecting Background Knowledge, and finally, Academically Challenging Activities.
When we plan instruction, we must consider the AKS and the assessment expectations, as well as the students' educational background and the assets of their linguistic and cultural experiences that will ultimately shed light on what we can leverage to make stronger connections between what our students know and what they're learning, enhance the learning experience for all students, and help us identify how and what scaffolding is needed for full mastery of the content. We've included a few questions here to get you started to reflect on your EL's experiences. As you plan your lessons, the answers to these questions in particular will guide you on how you might leverage your ELs as assets to enhance instruction and identify scaffolds that are going to be necessary to support their learning. Now we're going to take some time to define each pillar, and we encourage you to think about how you already include these components in your lessons. It is important to provide students with the opportunity to engage with the academic and the social language in each of their courses. The pillars in the framework will facilitate this. Remember, it's not an expectation that teachers would include all of these pillars in every lesson, but we do hope you'll take those into consideration as you plan. So let's take a first look at this pillar. This is the pillar that represents teacher and student collaboration. The intention for this pillar is for the students and the teacher to collaborate in order to generate a product or work on a common goal. So for example, the teacher might be collaborating with students on creating a model in math, creating a book in language arts, or sequencing a process in science, or perhaps identifying the central message of a political cartoon in social studies. This next pillar of the framework is about using instructional conversation to elicit and extend talk on academic, personal, social, and cultural experiences in relation to an academic topic. The conversations are facilitated by the teacher, but occur between the students in small groups and in an inclusive manner. They are sure to increase participation and dialogue by all students, and this output of language is what really propels language learning. For example, the teacher in a literature course may pose a question about a character in a novel and provide students with conversation starters to discuss further, provide evidence for their answers. Instructional conversations can be utilized alongside teacher-student collaboration so that as a product is generated by the teacher and the students, there is also an abundance of rich dialoguing and oral language production to increase students' language development.
Now let's move on to the language and literacy pillar. Here, we stress the development and use of academic language by students in all content areas. It is important that teachers build a strong understanding of the academic language of the content they teach in order to be able to effectively work alongside the students to increase their repertoire of content-specific and technical language through questioning, rephrasing, and modeling. For example, teachers may use anchor charts, sentence frames, and authentic documents that will elicit the use of academic language. In order to connect a student's background knowledge to the AKS, teachers need to consider what a student already knows in order to build schema that will help students process new learning. This can be done through the use of formative assessments, interviews, and even discussions. How will you know about their prior educational experience or their prior life context? It is not possible to know everything about every culture or educational system. However, here are a few examples of how an EL student's background knowledge may impact the way he or she learns in your classroom. It would be important for a mathematics teacher to know that students from Latin American countries are accustomed to using a comma where we use the decimal and vice versa. Also, they set up their long division problems completely different than we do. In social studies, the teacher needs to consider how a student may react to studying a historical event that may have negatively impacted his or her family. And on the other hand, the students may bring rich perspectives from their own personal lives and experiences that can enrich what you're teaching. In language arts, students from Latin American countries, for example, are taught to compose an essay in a roundabout manner as opposed to our American linear style. In science, it's important to consider that students from other countries may not be as familiar with the examples we may use in class due to their experience with a different topography and natural environment. Conversely, they may bring a wealth of knowledge about specific environments having lived in different countries. Capitalize on these experiences. Lastly, but certainly not least, it is important for teachers to engage English learners in higher order thinking skills and problem-solving tasks to ensure that the students continuously engage in productive struggle. The students should not reach a point of frustration, but should be pushed just enough with proper support to increase their language production and content mastery. You'll notice above in the definition that it says that tasks are leveled at ZPD. This stands for Zone of Proximal Development, the point that is just before the student's independent level. This is based on the work of the language theorist Vygotsky and complements the notion of productive struggle. For example, the student who is just learning to write in English may be given a report frame as a support versus being asked to write something on his or her own. Another example, the teacher who would like students to sort information would need to think about whether to provide the students with the categories or ask the students to come up with the categories on their own.
The magic happens when teachers are able to integrate the framework with their content lessons. Each pillar of our framework can be applied to lessons from each of the different content areas. In fact, we've designed a tool to guide teachers when planning a lesson with the ESOL Instructional Framework in mind. Again, we wouldn't expect that all of these components are present in every lesson, but it is good practice to consider each pillar and the possible teacher and student actions for the desired outcome. Here's an example of a 4th grade lesson taken from the GCPS ESOL, the Elementary Communication Center, in the area of mathematics. As you can see in blue, we've been able to apply or connect one of the pillars of the ESOL Instructional Framework to an existing component of this lesson. So let's take a quick look at this lesson plan. Notice that in the background prior knowledge section, there's an obvious connection to the educational background pillar. As we read through the teaching portion of this lesson, we also see that it is addressing 3 components of our framework: language and literacy development, connecting background knowledge, and cultural awareness. We encourage you to read through a lesson plan that you've recently developed and note the parts that correlate to the ESOL Instructional Framework components. You may decide that you'd like to be more intentional about including additional components. In your CLT meetings, as you collaborate on your unit plans, you may also find that your team tends to rely on certain components more so than others. We invite you to consider planning to include these missing components. We've also developed a gone digital version of our framework that will provide teachers with ideas on how to incorporate the components of the framework into their digital lessons for, those days when you'll have to provide digital learning. Notice that the one on the left is for K5, grades K5, and the one on the right is for grades 6 through 12. These slides, our whole entire slide deck, will be available to you on our Comm Center, the EL Programs Online Communication Center, also known as the LPOC. Each snapshot here is also linked to the actual document. These resources will also be available on the LPOC. Thank you so much for your attention throughout this video. We hope that this has provided you a general understanding of the GCPS ESOL Instructional Framework and the research upon which it is based. And also, we hope that you have now developed a stronger understanding of the connection between the framework and best practices for planning your lessons in your CLTs. Thanks so much.